Hey guys, this is Coach Adrian with Blitz Kids, and today we're going to be going over a game of the week. And this one is actually pretty interesting because I decided to switch it up and play the Carl Khan, something that I normally don't play. I'm more of a French player, but nevertheless, it's actually a pretty good video over the few topics here, which is converting advantages and realizing the center control. Having firm center control is going to be key, and just really consolidating your position. So let's go ahead and dive right in and see what happened and how I was able to get a pretty good edge here. So of course, the game started off with e4, then I played pawn to c6, initiating the Caro-Kann defense. After d4, I played d5, and it's up to my opponent what he wants to play here. He can play e takes d5, he can play e5, and he can play like knight to c3. My opponent actually chooses none of these. There's actually even like a f3 variation. This is called the fantasy variation. It's pretty wild. But yeah, if like knight c3, the main line goes after d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop to f5, knight to g3, and after bishop to g6, you're going to have ideas of knight f3, h4, h5, and then maybe even follow it up with bishop to d3. So there's lots of moves here in the position for white, lots of ideas to gain small incremental advantages, but for the most part, black is going to be able to survive the opening by going into a e6 structure. So this is actually pretty interesting. And now after bishop to d3 is what my opponent played. I actually captured here, and the reason why this is not as favorable as knight c3 is because one, you lose flexibility with the bishop, and after bishop takes e4, I can exchange and follow it up with a gain of tempo with knight f6. So here my opponent should play bishop to f3, and the idea is just now, I mean, it's the point of bishop d3 to actually relocate the bishop here via bishop takes e4 and then bishop f3. And then from here, you're controlling these squares, putting pressure on c6. So if I ever break, now b7 is under pressure. So this is actually not a bad way of playing. It's just different. It's not as common. Yeah, it's not as commonplace. So yeah, but my opponent actually blundered here, and this is where you have to pay attention to that center. Don't forget about center control. It's always key. And this is going to show you how once you get out of book, especially with an advantage, you have to just really notice what's going on here. So like I played queen takes d4 here. Notice there's no discover attacks on my queen. So one thing that is really key is that now the e5 and c5 have really lightened up, and this crumbles all of white's strategy. So the only thing that white can really talk about, or parade about, well, is nothing, but really it's the open E and D file. That's all he can say. And really right now I'm controlling the D file, and I'm the one utilizing the open space. So now that I realize that I've dampened up the protection over c5 and e5 from my opponent, now I'm going to look for ways to push this pawn to e5 in the near future. And I still want to develop, right? So I got to develop first and follow those principles. But my overall plan is going to be this e5 square. I want to push this pawn to e5, and then from there, I'm just better. Maybe because then I have threats of like e4, gaining more space, creating threats, going into the enemy territory, and this is going to be pretty much lights out. So after queen takes d4, my opponent plays knight f3, rightly so, gaining tempo. I play queen to d6. All right, go ahead and pause your video. See why I would play something like queen to d6 and not something like queen to b4 check, which is more of a forcing move. So why would I play here and not here? All right, so the main reason again is you have to have a plan. You can't have every single piece doing their own individual thing. That's not how chess works. Chess is a team game. Everybody should be coordinating to accomplish a certain goal, and that goal should obtain or give you an advantage. Now, if I play, let's say, check after something like knight to c3, you'll realize I just help him develop his pieces where they want to go. And then, yeah, so this isn't, my queen isn't necessarily great here. Um, but my opponent hits me with a surprise move later on in the game, and my queen ends up going to b4. But I always have a reason, okay? And oh, one thing that we also can learn here is I always multi-purpose my moves too. So like after I play queen to d6, I'm controlling here, getting ready for e5, and then whenever I do, the bishop is going to be protecting the queen on d6. And I'm still exerting pressure everywhere on the board. I have pressure on h2, I have pressure down the d file, I have pressure on the queen side. So this is really just, overall, it's just a good way to play. So let's see, my opponent plays castle kingside. And remember, my whole theme of this is I want to move with multiple purposes in mind. See, that's the difference between like a beginner player and a great player. Is like a beginner player will try and just move one piece for one reason, but you have to be more open-minded than that. You have to multi-purpose your moves. So here I played bishop to g4, which, okay, let's look at the multi-purpose. So one reason is to pin the knight to the queen, which ultimately dampens up the e5 and d4 square. Um, Another reason I need to develop my pieces. Another reason is because now I can play e5 a little bit better. And the last reason why I played this was now I can also play e6. And then when I shut the structure down and get this solid structure, my bishop's going to be protecting on d6, but also the bishop is outside of that pawn structure, something that is just a principle-based move. And another reason is, okay, if I'm up in material, what do I want to do? I want to trade pieces. So this invites a trade for knight and bishop. So that's something to realize. I'm not just playing one move for one reason. I'm playing it for multiple reasons. So my opponent plays knight to c3. And I'm not really worried about this square, but this square is available to him. So e4 is definitely a possibility, forcing the trade. But again, I'm not scared of this because why? Because I love trades. So e6, and yeah, this was a pivotal moment here. The reason why I didn't play e5, because I can play e5 right away, but I gotta realize I'm behind in development. See, I have 3 pieces out. I'm at least one, two, three moves away from castling, and yeah, this is not good. My opponent's already castled. So I need to realize my disadvantage as well as my advantage and take away my opponent's advantage if possible. So ultimately, I'm trying to negate this lead in development. And all I had to do that, in order to do that, is I need to castle. So here, let's say I play e5. Just play it right away. Well, you have to calculate a little bit here because after rook to e1, I mean, now this is hit twice, right? And then I also have knight to d7, and then maybe even bishop to f4 is pretty annoying. Although I still have this knight in a pin, it's still annoying to even have this pressure here. Like my opponent can play something like, okay, well, let's say I play bishop to e7. Well, now I think I can have like, well, hold on, let me see, because this knight, so bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes. Well, I could just play bishop to g3 actually. And then now you see that this is a pin. Ooh, excuse me, not that. This is a pin. Maybe this isn't a pin anymore, but this h2 to b8 diagonal is definitely a pin. So I didn't want to come under heavy fire there, so I decided to play e6. And this is a very common thing in the Carl-Con structure. You just get that solid mountain and you kind of aim at this d5 square and just hunker down. And since my opponent doesn't have a d4 pawn here, he's not exerting pressure on these dark squares here. So I'm really not worried about uh, control over this dark square complex. So here my opponent plays rook to e1, bishop to e7. Notice how I'm trying to take away his disadvantage by just developing my pieces. And at the same time, I'm going to implement my pieces. So here, bishop to g5, and I castle here. Castling's okay, but I do believe maybe a slightly better move order is knight to d7. because if he plays knight to e, excuse me, not that move. If he plays bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, then knight to, hold on, wrong variation. If I castle, now my opponent can play bishop takes f6, and after bishop takes f6, this knight can go here, exchange with a gain of tempo, so like queen e7, and after knight takes f6, queen takes f6. This position here, I saw that I was like, okay, like I'm still fine here, but I did lose some tempo, and I think the reason why my opponent actually didn't go for that is because um, he didn't want to trade. So knight bd7 might be a slightly better move order because he doesn't have this possibility. Because now knight e4 is met with knight takes e4, bishop takes, and then maybe even queen takes, or just like rook to d8. Um, but yeah, I don't want him to have that possibility. So it's like finding the little tweaks, the details that will allow you to find the best move. And I'm multi-purposing my moves. You know, I'm going to get my rook out. I'm also getting my king to safety away from the e-file, which then ultimately allows me to play e5 in the future. And so here he plays bishop to h4. And I wasn't too sure why he played that until he played the next move. So I play knight b to d7 easily. And this is the surprise move where he kind of got me. So bishop g3 actually makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a really good move by my opponent. Nothing that will change the game or the course, but it's definitely a game changer because, or excuse me, it's definitely a good move in the right direction. It's a good step in the right direction because now he's also controlling over e5. So I definitely saw the multi-purpose in that move. And here I had to play something like queen to b4 just to put pressure here, put pressure on the knight on c3. So this could be a lesson learned already is, you know, make sure that you take your time and that you're not rushing. However, I will give myself a little bit of room, a little bit of an excuse here because it was a 5-3 game. So I'm not critically thinking over every single move. However, I do need to pay attention to my opponent's threats at all times. And this is where I kind of faltered a little bit. But after queen to b4, the position's perfectly fine. I'm still winning. I'm up a pawn. I still have my nice solid structure. There's no weaknesses. There's nothing. And I just counterpunch. So I decided to counterpunch. If he's going to throw my queen a bit off balance, I'm going to counterpunch there. And he can't move it up because the queen has pressure on c3. I'm also protecting the bishop on g4. And if my pawn gets to e5, then I can easily push to e4 because now my queen is protecting there too. So this is actually not so bad. My opponent plays rook b1. I play rook f to d8. And so I'm just lining up my rook with the queen, right? And I'm getting ready for knight to c5. And in this game, I didn't tell you guys, but I actually mouse slipped. So I feel like this is actually a learning opportunity whenever you do mouse slip. Um, see, moves are like a package deal, all right? So let's say you have a goal, and my goal is to push e5, right? That's my goal. Push e5, push e4. That's my goal. Once I get that, then my position is just going to be overwhelming because I'm actually using that extra pawn to use, and it's going to dismantle my opponent's coordination with his pieces. So that's why I want to get my pawn to e4. All right, so that was my plan. And the reason why I say we can learn from this mouse slip is because I played the wrong move accidentally. I meant to play, and you'll see in just a moment, it's the very next move from this position. And whenever I play into this, I have to modify my plan. I can't just keep pushing my plan because the knight doesn't actually go with it. So let me just show you. My opponent plays queen e2, and this is a good move. He's watching over these two squares and developing his last piece to connect the rooks. And he's getting out of this potential pin. And here I've now mouse slip and play knight to b6. What I meant to play was knight to c5. And knight to c5 is just a move where I can direct pressure here. So like, let's say he just plays a nothing move. So let's say king h1. My idea was knight takes d3, and after c takes d3, now I have a backwards d pawn to work with. And then I can start directing pressure along this file. So something like rook to d7 followed by rook to d8, and eventually I'm going to break either with e5, e4 or c5, c4. And this all kind of goes with my plan of pushing the e-pawn, but now I have extra goodies in this position. And now if my opponent does something about it, let's say he moves the bishop, well, then here in this position, I believe this e4 square is starting to become a little bit more accessible. So maybe I can play something like bishop takes f3, and after queen takes f3, it drops the bishop on c4. Or if g takes, well, now this square is actually taken away from me, but this square is definitely I'm able to use. So now the rook is hitting the bishop has to move back, and I can definitely get rid of the bishop pair if I wanted to, and I probably would in this position. And now I would just double up, and we could see that my position is actually overwhelming, and even without the e5 advance, I'm still good. And by just molding or changing and being fluid with my position, you'll notice that e5, e4 is not so important anymore, and instead the d file is important. So maintaining flexibility with your plans and your options is also important, and that's why it's so important to really be multi-purpose your moves, because then you know all the possible options, all the possible outcomes that you can potentially play. It's about knowing your resources in the position. All right, so that was a possibility, but now I played knight to b6, and I was like, oh, mouse slip, you know, not good, not good. But this has more of an idea of coming to d5, watching over e4 with my knight, more defensive. But I did not mean to play this, and so you'll see that I kind of modify my position just a little bit after a3. Now my queen can't reserve back to b6, or like for example I can't play a5 because then b4, and then I'm like in trouble. But actually maybe not, because I have queen to h4 or queen to h5 putting pressure here. So in this position I decided to kind of cash out and play bishop takes f3, and the idea is after a takes b4, bishop takes e2, and then bishop takes e2, then I can play bishop takes b4. And ultimately I just wanted to, after this, have that dark square for my queen. Oh, and then I offered the trade. So he actually obliges. And remember, trades are always good for me. So by having that extra material, I have a multitude of plans, a multitude of ideas. And by just trading, this is just favorable for me. Okay, he plays h3. I play knight f6. This square is no longer available for me. Bishop to c7, but now after rook d7, he takes, I take, and he gets rid of his bishop pair for the doubled pawn. And it looks like maybe he could do this, but to threaten here. But can you pause your videos and see why this move does not work? All right, good answer. It's very simple. Rook takes a4, so he can't play that, and he can't go this way to attack. So he decides knight to e4, but I'm like, okay, well, trades are favorable to me, so I'm going to go knight takes, bishop takes, and now pawn to b5. And my idea is to play pawn to b4. He can't play b3 because I have bishop takes or rook takes. They're both good. Rook takes would probably be best. And the idea behind b3 is now if I play b4, you play a4. And if he plays this move, well, I mean, this drops. So that idea is coming for sure, but I start tidying up my position first. So I play here, rook to d8. And I think a better move besides b5, because I feel like that choice will always be there, is maybe just playing rook to d8 immediately with the idea of infiltrating on d2. This is another idea to go about. But now he has a4, rook to d2, bishop to d3. My rooks are kind of disconnected, and I can't ever get this push in anymore. So I decided to take advantage of it now. So we exchange. I control the d file still. I check. After king h2, I play bishop to d6 check. And since we have opposite colored bishops with some extra pieces, I want to be aggressive. So here he plays there. I play bishop to c5. Now we're just pure blitzing. There's no doubt about it. These aren't super top moves, but I do have an idea of attacking on f2, and then I still play aggressive with f5, bishop d3, and now I was assuming that my opponent would play something like bishop to f3. I thought this was better, but after bishop to d3, king f7, protecting this pawn, now this is going to trap the bishop, and this actually comes into play. King f6, getting my king into play, and now pawn to e5, and this is where he messed up. Yeah, this is a big blunder here. Instead, I believe maybe pawn to f4 looks really ugly, but the idea is now you can try and put pressure on this square, but I'm not too sure how, because this bishop is stuck. He can't do much. Yeah. So after e5, he plays g4, but now it's too late. e4 forks. And just to tell you guys, he couldn't do anything about this. There's no way to stop it. He plays king g2, e4 anyway, and the bishop's trapped. So that's why bishop d3 is just not good. And he was just really bent over getting his bishop to d3. He just loved that square. And I know you guys are, well, why didn't he just play, c3? Well, yeah, but the rook has pressure here. So let's not do that. And this is a really ugly structure to even get in. So after e4, this is just like converting. I play check. And again, we're blitzing it out, so it actually did take a little bit of time here. Check. Rook there, out for a trade, and then get my king over here. So I kind of built a bridge here so my king can kind of get more centralized. And then I just played here. This actually wasn't a good move. I can definitely improve on that. Let's see what the computer says on that this position. Okay, here f3, and now bishop. Wow, this is pretty interesting. Oh, with the idea of just like playing rook e2. If he goes down here, I have rook e2 check, so he has to go rook to f2. But now it's pointing out that he should just forget about it and play something like this. So now check, king here, and then rook takes c2. Yeah, this is game over. Okay, let me turn that off. Definitely wanted to see that suggestion so I could see where I could improve, especially with us blitzing it out. It wasn't high quality. But yeah, here I just trade. I accidentally pre-moved the rook. I wanted to recapture with the pawn. So this is a slight inaccuracy as well. But nevertheless, I start getting into a better position. Trade off this, and now, yeah, so this is the final bad move. So I'm putting pressure here. The idea is that I'm covering all of these squares. Notice. And then, yeah. So the rook has to move, and now after this, I play rook takes g4. Something like this. So going back, that's why he played king f3, but this is a really bad move. Go ahead and pause the video, see if you can find the final sequence of moves that allowed me to execute my opponent, and he just resigned after 3 moves later. Alright, the move is rook check to e3 because he has to protect the rook, but now bishop check, and now he has to move the king here. He can't go here, he can't go here, and if he moves back over here, of course king takes. And the same thing with king to d2, I just take. So he has to play king to d3, but now after rook check, he can no longer block with the rook because of this. The bishop is protecting the rook, and if he plays king to d2, of course I play king takes e4. So it is in this position my opponent resigns. So it was actually a really good game. A few things that we can learn again to recap is one, um, even just following some basic opening principles, we're able to get a good position. Always pay attention to the center, and whenever you get the advantage, you need to make sure that you're not running into some counterplay, unnecessary counterplay. Make sure that you consolidate, and what that means is look at your opponent's disadvantage and then try to take, excuse me, try to take away your opponent's advantage they got against you. Okay, so that's what you're trying to do by consolidating. You're trying to stop all of their active play, all of their compensation for that extra pawn. So then in turn, once you stop that, then you'll have all the extra goodies that you were promised in the position. Another thing, in order to do that, you need to multi-purpose your moves. Multi-purpose your moves allows you to have a more broad uh, horizon, more options on the board. It allows you to see all of these small details, which actually do come together and they do help in positions. And if you're single-minded and if you're really bent on moving to this way, this plan, it's set in stone, you may miss a lot of possibilities in the position because chess is full of possibilities and creativity. So make sure that you're just keeping your mind open to all of these ideas, that you're actually evaluating the position and looking at what's actually going on, and not just like, okay, I'm playing this for only one purpose. No, your job is to play a move and at the very least have three reasons each and every single move why you played that move. And usually it could be a defensive move or an attacking move or even a counter attacking move. So definitely think about that. Try to implement it in your games. Even if it's silly, even if it's simple, say it out loud or and think it in your head whenever you're practicing, because then after a while you're gonna pick up it subconsciously, and you're gonna be able to do it just off the rip. Okay, so thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you guys next time.